The glass trembled in Claire Bennett's hand the moment Ethan Cole waved her away without even looking at her. It wasn't loud, not a dramatic crash, just a small ripple in a crystal glass under Manhattan chandelier light, but somehow everyone at the table felt it. Claire steadied it before a single drop spilled. "Sparkling or still?" she asked, her voice even, professional. Ethan didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the contract in front of him, speaking over her as if she were part of the furniture. "We close tonight," he said to the investors. "No delays. No revisions." Claire held her position for half a second longer, then placed the bottle gently on the table. Action precise. Controlled. Across from Ethan, a young associate shifted in his seat. "Should we double-check the amendment from this morning?" he asked carefully. Ethan didn't look up. "If you needed more time, you should have asked for it yesterday," he replied. The room tightened. Claire moved to the next setting, adjusting a fork that sat slightly off-center beside a linen napkin. Small things mattered. They always did. The restaurant smelled faintly of seared steak and butter. A Knicks game played silently on the bar TV in the corner. Someone laughed too loudly near the window, then stopped when they noticed the tension at Ethan's table. Claire returned with water glasses. She placed one in front of a woman in a navy suit who had been watching everything without speaking. Their eyes met briefly. The woman gave a small nod. Not approval. Recognition. Ethan finally reached for his glass, still not looking at Claire. "Next time, don't interrupt a live negotiation," he said flatly. Claire paused. She didn't flinch. "Understood, sir," she replied. Then she stepped back, but her eyes moved once more to the document on the table. A corner of the page had been folded. A handwritten note sat just above a printed clause. The ink was darker than the rest. New. The associate leaned forward again. "It's just that the numbers, they're correct," Ethan cut in. "I don't build companies on guesswork." His tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Control was quieter than anger. Claire picked up the empty bread plate from the edge of the table. Her fingers brushed the paper for the briefest second. Long enough to read a line. Her expression didn't change, but something. Behind her eyes sharpened. The woman in the navy suit noticed. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. Claire looked up. "Claire," she said. "Claire Bennett." Ethan exhaled impatiently. "Can we stay focused?" he said. The woman didn't respond. She kept watching Claire. Claire stepped back into place. Silent again. But not invisible. Not anymore. The associate flipped a page. His brow furrowed. "Mr. Cole, Clause 14 references a different valuation than the amendment." Ethan finally looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "Then you're reading it wrong," he said. Claire's hand tightened slightly around the tray. Just enough to feel the weight. Just enough to decide. She glanced once more at the ink. Fresh. Deliberate. And wrong. Her voice hadn't entered the conversation yet. But it was about to. And when it did, nothing in that room would stay the same. Claire set the bread plate down and stepped back, but the tension at the table shifted in a way that could not be undone. The associate flipped the page again, slower this time, his finger tracing the printed numbers. "Wait," he said, more firmly now. "This amendment changes the valuation by almost 8%. One of the investors leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "That is not a rounding error," he muttered. Ethan exhaled through his nose and reached for the document, his movements controlled but sharper than before. "You are misreading a preliminary draft," he said. "The final version is what matters." Claire stood still, tray balanced against her hip. From where she stood, she could see both pages clearly now. The printed clause listed a valuation tied to last quarter's numbers. The handwritten amendment pushed it forward to projected earnings that had not been publicly released. The ink was still slightly glossy under the light. New. Too new. The woman in the navy suit spoke again, her tone calm but direct. Was this amendment disclosed to all parties? Ethan met her gaze. It was updated this morning, he said. Standard practice. The associate shook his head. I did not receive this version. A second investor pulled out his phone and opened the digital copy of the contract. He scrolled quickly, then stopped. It is not here, he said. The words landed heavier than anyone expected. Claire took a step forward, then stopped herself. Her job was to serve, not to speak. That line had been clear for years. But the room was no longer operating by the rules she had memorized. Ethan tapped the paper once with his pen. A small, precise motion. Then you are looking at an outdated file, he said. We move forward. Claire's eyes shifted to the margin again. The handwriting was neat. Deliberate. Not rushed. Whoever wrote it knew exactly what they were doing. She picked up an empty glass from the far edge of the table, her fingers steady. As she turned, the associate spoke again. Sir, with respect, this changes the risk exposure significantly. Ethan's jaw tightened. With respect, he repeated, his voice quieter now, that is why I am here. The woman in the navy suit did not look at Ethan this time. She looked at Claire. You noticed something, she said. It was not a question. Claire paused. Every instinct told her to step away. To let the room resolve itself. To remain invisible. But the evidence was sitting in plain sight, and silence now felt like participation. I noticed the ink, Claire said carefully. The table stilled. Ethan's eyes flicked to her for the first time with focus. What about it? He asked. Claire placed the glass down. It is newer than the rest of the document, she said. Her tone remained respectful, but her words were exact. And the clause it modifies references numbers that are not printed anywhere else on that page. The associate leaned in immediately. She is right, he said, scanning the text again. The reference point does not exist in the original section. The investor with the phone frowned. That would mean the amendment is introducing a variable that has not been formally defined. Ethan leaned back in his chair, just slightly. The movement was small, but it broke the forward pressure he had been holding all evening. You are drawing conclusions from a partial view, he said. Claire met his gaze. Not challenging. Not apologizing. Just steady. Then there should be a full view, she replied. The woman in the navy suit allowed herself a faint smile. The associate looked between them, tension rising in his shoulders. The deal was no longer moving forward. It was unraveling in real time. And for the first time that night, Ethan Cole was no longer controlling the pace of the room. Claire reached for the check folder, but her eyes returned once more to the handwritten line, because something about the phrasing did not just look new, it looked familiar, and she was starting to realize she might have seen that exact structure before, somewhere she was never supposed to be. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around the check folder as the shape of the handwriting settled into something sharper in her memory. It was not just neat. It was structured in a way she had seen before, numbers aligned with a precision that felt almost mechanical, each stroke deliberate, each curve controlled. She had seen that style across a kitchen table under a dim lamp in Queens, years ago, when contracts were not business tools but survival documents. Where did you learn to read legal language like that? The woman in the navy suit asked, her voice quieter now, but far more focused. Claire did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the water pitcher and refilled a glass that did not need refilling. A simple action. Something visible. Something that gave her a second to think. From someone who could not afford to misunderstand it, she said finally. Ethan watched her more closely now. The distance he had placed between them earlier had shifted into scrutiny. You are a waitress, he said. It was not an insult. It was an assertion of order. Claire met his gaze. Tonight, yes, she replied. The associate let out a short breath, almost a laugh, then caught himself. The tension at the table had changed shape. It was no longer just about the contract. It was about who was allowed to speak and who was not. The investor with the phone turned the screen toward the group. "The digital file timestamp is from yesterday at 4:12 p.m., he said. "This amendment does not exist in that version." The woman in the navy suit leaned back slightly. "Then we have a document on the table that was altered after distribution," she said. Ethan's jaw tightened again, but this time he did not interrupt. He looked down at the handwritten line, then back at Claire. "You said the reference does not exist," he said. Claire nodded once. "The clause points to projected earnings that are not defined anywhere in the base agreement," she said. "That means the valuation is built on something the other parties cannot verify." The associate flipped back 2 pages. "She is right," he said again, more certain now. "There is no supporting data here." Claire felt the weight of the room settle differently on her shoulders. Not as pressure. As a tension. It was a familiar shift, but one she had learned to handle carefully. Years ago, a tension had come with consequences she could not control. She glanced at the handwritten note again. The phrasing. The structure. It was not just familiar. It was identical to a clause she had helped rewrite at a kitchen table when her father had been fighting a contract that nearly cost them their home. The memory was not loud. It did not flood her. It aligned. Quietly. Precisely. The woman in the navy suit spoke again. "What would you do if you were sitting at this table as a decision maker?" Claire did not hesitate this time. "I would ask who wrote that amendment," she said. The question landed harder than any accusation. Ethan's eyes shifted, just for a fraction of a second, toward the associate on his right. It was small. Almost invisible. But Claire saw it. The associate followed the glance and froze. "I did not write that," he said quickly. The investor with the phone lowered it slowly. "Then someone added it after the last version was circulated," he said. Claire's grip on the check folder loosened. The pattern was clearer now. The ink. The structure. The timing. And the way Ethan had pushed the deal forward without pause. She stepped back slightly, but her voice remained in the room. "If it was added this morning," she said, "then whoever wrote it expected no one to look closely." Ethan leaned forward again, but this time his movement carried something different. Not control. Calculation. "And yet you did," he said. Claire held his gaze. "Yes," she replied. The room fell into a quieter kind of silence. Not confusion. Not tension. Something sharper. Something that demanded the next answer. And Ethan knew that whatever came next would decide whether this deal survived, because for the first time that night, the most important question in the room was no longer about the contract, but about who had changed it and why. The silence did not break until Claire moved. She stepped closer to the table again, slower this time, and set the check folder down beside the contract instead of at the edge. The placement was deliberate. It brought her within inches of the handwritten amendment. "May I?" she asked, her eyes on Ethan, not the paper. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gave a short nod. "Go ahead." Claire opened the folder and pulled out a small pen she carried for orders. It was nothing special. Blue ink. Cheap plastic. She did not write. She pointed. "This number here," she said, tapping lightly on the handwritten clause, "it is rounded differently than the rest of the document." The associate leaned in immediately. "What do you mean?" Claire shifted slightly so the others could see. "Every printed figure in this contract rounds to the nearest 1,000, she explained. This one rounds to the nearest 100. The investor with the phone blinked. "That is true." He zoomed in on the digital file. All original values end in triple zeros. The woman in the navy suit crossed her arms. "And this one does not," she said. Claire nodded. "That means whoever wrote it was not following the original formatting standard." Ethan reached for the page and studied it again, this time longer. The confidence in his posture did not disappear, but it adjusted. Less forward. More contained. Formatting can change, he said. Claire met his gaze. Not in finalized agreements that are about to be signed, she replied. The associate swallowed. She is right. We have a formatting protocol for consistency. He looked at Ethan, uncertain now. We always round to the nearest 1,000. A second investor leaned forward, his voice sharper. So this amendment was not prepared by your legal team. Ethan did not answer immediately. He turned the page over, then back again, as if the motion itself might reveal something new. Claire watched his hands. No hesitation. No tremor. But the speed had changed. He was no longer moving ahead. He was checking. That was new. The woman in the navy suit shifted her attention to the margin. There is also a difference in pen pressure, she said. The strokes are heavier here than in the initials below. Claire felt a quiet confirmation settle in her chest. Yes, she said. Whoever wrote this pressed harder. Different habit. The investor with the phone lowered it completely now. So we have an amendment that does not match the digital file, does not follow formatting standards, and was written by someone outside the documented chain, he said. The words were no longer cautious. They were direct. Ethan looked up at Claire again. This time there was no dismissal left in his expression. Only focus. You are making a serious implication, he said. Claire held her ground. I am describing what is visible, she replied. The associate shifted in his seat again, but this time he did not speak. He looked at the margin, then at Ethan, then back at the margin. Something clicked behind his eyes. Wait, he said suddenly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. We printed a reference draft earlier today in the office. He flipped it open and laid it beside the contract. The pages aligned almost perfectly. Almost. Except for one line. The handwritten amendment was missing. And in its place, a blank space where a clause should have been. The table went still. The evidence was no longer subtle. It was physical. Side by side. Verifiable. The woman in the navy suit leaned forward. So the original draft had no amendment at all, she said. The associate nodded slowly. None. Ethan's fingers rested on the edge of the table. Still. Controlled. But the room had shifted beyond control now. Claire stepped back, her role complete for the moment, but her eyes remained on the documents. Because the blank space in that earlier draft was not just an omission. It was a placeholder. And that meant someone had planned to fill it later, and the only question left was who had access to that page between the office and this table. The shift from suspicion to consequence came fast. Ethan closed the folder with the earlier draft and slid it to the center of the table, then pressed a button on his phone. Hold the signature, he said to someone on the line. No documents leave this room. He ended the call and looked directly at Claire. And no one else speaks to this until we understand it. The statement was calm, controlled, and final. The investors exchanged glances. The woman in the navy suit did not look away from Claire. You just escalated this from a discrepancy to a containment issue, she said to Ethan. That affects all of us. Ethan nodded once. It protects all of us, he replied. Then he turned back to Claire. Where were you standing when you first saw this? The question was precise. Directed. It pulled her into the center whether she wanted it or not. Claire set the tray down on the service stand beside the table. Right here, she said, stepping back to the exact spot. I was placing the water. Ethan watched her recreate the movement. And you read that line from that distance, he asked. Claire met his gaze. I read patterns, she said. The line confirmed it. The associate shifted again, more tense now. "Sir, if this amendment was added after distribution, we need to identify access points," he said. Ethan nodded. "We will." He reached for the contract and turned it toward himself, then toward the associate. "List everyone who handled this document after it left the office." The associate swallowed. "It went from legal to me. Then to your office for final review." He hesitated. "Then here." The room tightened again. The investor with the phone spoke quietly. "So the window is narrow." The woman in the navy suit added, "And the accountability is closer than anyone here would prefer." Ethan did not respond to that. His attention remained on Claire. "You said the structure looked familiar," he said. "Explain that." Claire felt the pressure shift fully onto her now. Not as background. As a source. She chose her words carefully. "The way the clause is written," she said, "it borrows authority from a section that does not support it. That is not accidental. It is a technique." The associate frowned. "A technique for what?" Claire held his gaze for a moment, then answered. "For making something look legitimate long enough to pass a quick review." The investor with the phone exhaled. So this was designed to slip through. Ethan's expression did not change, but his next action did. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket and placed it beside the contract. "No one leaves," he said. "We verify every step." Then he looked at Claire again. "Including you." The words landed without hostility, but with weight. Claire understood immediately. She was no longer just the person who noticed. She was now part of the chain that had to be accounted for. The woman in the navy suit spoke before Claire could respond. "She did not bring that document to the table," she said. Ethan did not look at her. "No," he agreed. "But she is the only one who saw what the rest of us missed." He turned back to Claire. "That makes you essential." Claire nodded once. "Then I will stay," she said. The associate opened his laptop, pulling up access logs. The screen reflected in his glasses. "I can track edits if they were made digitally," he said. "But this is handwritten." The investor with the phone leaned closer. "Then we look at physical access." Ethan's gaze moved slowly around the table, then stopped on the folder again. The blank space in the earlier draft sat like a missing piece. Planned. Waiting. Claire followed his gaze. Because now the pattern extended beyond the ink. It included timing, movement, opportunity, and the way Ethan had insisted on closing tonight. The realization did not arrive all at once. It aligned. Quietly. Precisely. Claire spoke again, her voice steady. "The amendment was not just added late," she said. "It was meant to be added here." The room went still again. Ethan looked at her, not with dismissal, not even with scrutiny, but with something closer to recognition. "Then someone in this room was waiting for the moment to write it," he said. And for the first time, every person at that table understood that the problem was no longer in the document, it was sitting among them. The realization settled across the table like a quiet storm. Claire did not move immediately. She let the weight of her own words hang in the air, because this time it was not just observation, it was direction. Ethan's gaze stayed on her longer than before, not testing, not dismissing, but measuring. "You are saying the timing was intentional," he said. Claire nodded. "Yes," she replied. The blank space in the earlier draft was not an oversight. It was a placeholder waiting for a specific number. The associate froze halfway through typing. "A number that only someone in this room would know," he said slowly. The investor with the phone leaned back. "Or someone who expected to be in this room." That shifted it again. Claire stepped closer to the table, not as staff, but as someone now inside the logic of the problem. She reached toward the earlier draft, careful not to touch the handwritten page this time. "Look at the spacing here," she said. "The gap is not random. It is measured to fit a single line of text. Not more." Not less. The woman in the navy suit leaned forward. So whoever prepared this draft knew exactly how long the amendment would be before it was written. Claire nodded again. And they knew it would not be printed. Ethan's fingers tapped once on the table. A small sound. Controlled. Why handwritten? He asked. Claire answered without hesitation. Because handwritten changes are harder to trace in digital logs. They bypass version history. The associate looked up from his laptop. That is true, he admitted. If it was never typed, there is no metadata trail. The investor with the phone frowned. So someone avoided digital tracking on purpose. Claire's eye shifted back to the handwritten clause. The phrasing clicked deeper now. Not just familiar in structure. Familiar in intent. This is not just about hiding the change, she said. It is about making it look like it belongs long enough to get signatures. Ethan leaned forward slightly. And after that, he asked. Claire met his gaze. After that, it becomes enforceable. The room went still again. The stakes were no longer theoretical. They were legal. Immediate. Real. The woman in the navy suit spoke carefully. Then this is not just a mistake, she said. It is an insertion designed to shift value after agreement. Ethan did not respond right away. He looked at the associate. Who had physical access to the printed draft after it left your desk? The associate swallowed. You did, he said quietly. And I carried it here. A pause. Then he added, and it was on the table for about 10 minutes before everyone arrived. Claire's eye sharpened. Who was in the room during those 10 minutes, she asked. The associate hesitated. Just me. And he stopped. Ethan's gaze locked onto him. And who? The associate exhaled slowly. Your assistant stopped by, he said. She dropped off your updated schedule. A subtle shift moved through the room. Not loud. Not dramatic. But decisive. Ethan's posture changed almost imperceptibly. Less open. More contained. My assistant, he repeated. The investor with the phone straightened. Was she alone? The associate nodded. Yes. She placed the folder on the table and left. Claire's mind aligned the final pieces. Timing. Access. Knowledge of formatting. Understanding of how to bypass digital trace. She spoke carefully. Then whoever wrote that amendment knew the deal, knew the timing, and knew how to avoid detection, she said. Ethan's eyes did not leave her. That narrows it, he said. Claire held his gaze. Yes, she replied. But it does not finish it. The woman in the navy suit crossed her arms. Because knowing who had access is not the same as proving who used it, she said. Claire nodded slightly. Exactly. She looked down at the handwritten clause one more time, then back at Ethan. But there is one more thing, she said. Ethan's voice dropped lower. What? Claire took a small breath. The way that line is written, she said, it is not just familiar to me. She paused just long enough for the room to lean in. It is identical to a clause I helped rewrite 3 years ago, in a case involving your company. The silence that followed was different. Not confusion. Not tension. Recognition. And for the first time, the possibility emerged that this was not an isolated move, but part of something that had started long before tonight. The temperature in the room shifted again, but this time it did not drop. It sharpened. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression settling into something steadier, almost calculated. 3 years ago, he repeated. Be specific. Claire did not answer immediately. She reached for the water pitcher again and refilled the same glass she had touched before. The action was deliberate. It gave her control of the pace. It was a commercial dispute, she said. Small company. Manufacturing contract. Your firm acquired the parent group. The associate's fingers hovered above the keyboard. I remember that acquisition, he said quietly. There was a lawsuit over valuation adjustments. Claire nodded. Yes, she said. The clause that decided that case looked exactly like this one. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. And who wrote that clause? He asked. Claire met his gaze. Your legal team, she said. The answer landed, but it did not break the room. Instead, it gave Ethan something to stand on. He leaned forward again, regaining ground. Then what you are describing is standard legal architecture, he said. Not fraud. The investor with the phone nodded slowly. He has a point, he added. Aggressive drafting is not illegal. The woman in the navy suit remained still, watching Claire. Waiting. Claire did not react to the shift. She expected it. The structure is standard, she said calmly. The timing is not. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Explain. Claire pointed toward the earlier draft again. In that case, she said, the clause was present from the beginning. It was negotiated. Documented. Argued over. She let that settle, then added, this one was inserted after distribution, without disclosure, and without supporting data. The associate looked between them. That changes everything, he said under his breath. But Ethan did not retreat this time. He reached for the contract again and tapped the handwritten line with his pen. Or it changes nothing, he said. If it can be justified before execution. The confidence in his voice was not arrogance. It was strategy. He was no longer defending the past. He was positioning the present. The investor with the phone leaned forward again. Are you saying you can still validate this amendment? He asked. Ethan did not hesitate. I am saying that if the numbers can be supported, the structure holds, he replied. Claire watched him closely now. This was new. He was not denying the irregularity. He was reframing it. Turning risk into leverage. The woman in the navy suit spoke carefully. That assumes the numbers exist, she said. Ethan's gaze flicked to her. They do, he said. Claire felt the shift immediately. Not in the room. In the direction of the story. He was moving forward, not back. She stepped closer again, just enough to remain part of the conversation. Then show them, she said. Ethan looked at her. I will, he replied. He reached for his phone and opened a file, then turned the screen toward the table. A spreadsheet filled the display. Columns. Projections. Clean. Structured. Convincing. The associate leaned in. These are updated earnings forecasts, he said. The investor with the phone nodded slowly. If these hold, the amendment aligns. The pressure shifted again. This time toward Claire. The evidence was no longer just a handwritten inconsistency. It was now being supported by data. Ethan leaned back, just slightly, his control returning in layers. You saw a discrepancy, he said to Claire. That was useful. His tone remained even. But you are only seeing part of the picture. Claire looked at the screen. The numbers were clean. Too clean. Her eyes moved across the columns. Quarter projections. Growth rates. Margin adjustments. Then she saw it. A small detail. Not in the totals. In the timeline. Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened again. She looked back at Ethan. Those projections. She said, when were they finalized? Ethan did not blink. This morning, he replied. Claire nodded once. Slow. Precise. Then they should match the version your investors received before they walked into this room, she said. The associate froze. The investor with the phone lowered his device slightly. The woman in the navy suit leaned forward. And Ethan, for the first time since reclaiming control, did not answer immediately. Because the question Claire had just asked did not challenge the numbers. It challenged the timeline that made those numbers possible. The silence after Claire's question stretched just long enough to reveal something no one else had noticed before. Ethan did not rush to answer. That alone was new. He had been moving ahead of every objection all evening, but now he paused, and that pause became the most important detail in the room. Claire did not press him. She reached for the check folder again and opened it slowly, as if returning to her role, but her eyes remained on the table. Control was not about speaking first. It was about choosing when not to. The associate cleared his throat. The investor packet was finalized yesterday afternoon, he said, glancing at his laptop. Version control shows no updates after 4:12 p.m. The investor with the phone nodded. That matches what we received, he said. No revised projections were included. Ethan finally spoke. The projections were completed this morning, he said. His tone was steady again. They were not circulated yet. Claire nodded slightly, as if accepting the answer. That makes sense, she said. The room shifted again, but this time it leaned toward Ethan. The explanation was plausible. The structure held. The data existed. For a moment, it looked like the tension might resolve in his favor. Claire picked up the pen from the folder and clicked it once. A soft sound. Small. Precise. Then you plan to present them here, she said. Ethan met her gaze. Yes, he replied. Claire placed the pen back down. Before or after the signatures, she asked. The question landed differently. Not as a challenge. As a sequence. The associate looked up immediately. That matters, he said. The investor with the phone leaned forward again. If the amendment was introduced before the data was formally presented, then the agreement would be signed without full disclosure. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. The data is here now, he said. Claire tilted her head just a fraction. Now, she repeated. Then she stepped to the side of the table and reached for the earlier draft again, this time lifting it carefully and aligning it beside the current contract. A visible comparison. A choice. This version, she said, tapping the blank space, was what everyone agreed to review. She shifted her finger to the handwritten amendment. This version is what they are being asked to sign. The difference was no longer abstract. It was physical. Side by side. The woman in the navy suit spoke, her voice lower now. That is a material change in timing, she said. Claire nodded. Yes, she replied. Ethan leaned back slightly, but this time the movement did not reclaim control. It held position. You are assuming intent, he said. Claire met his gaze. I am mapping sequence, she replied. The associate turned his laptop around, pulling up a new window. We can check internal access logs for the projection file, he said. If it was created this morning, there will be a timestamp. Ethan did not stop him. That was another change. The associate typed quickly, then paused. His eyes narrowed. That is strange, he said. The investor with the phone leaned closer. What is it? The associate hesitated, then turned the screen slightly so the table could see. The file exists, he said. But the creation timestamp is not from this morning. Claire did not move. She did not react. She had been waiting for this. The associate swallowed. It was created 3 days ago, he said quietly. The room stilled again. Not with confusion this time. With alignment. Claire's hand rested lightly on the edge of the table. Steady. Certain. She looked at Ethan. So the projections were ready before the investor packet was sent, she said. Ethan did not answer immediately. And in that silence, Claire understood something deeper than the timing, deeper than the document, deeper than the amendment itself. This was never about reacting to a mistake. It was about watching a plan unfold. And now, for the first time, she was exactly where she needed to be to show them the part of the plan that no one else had seen yet. The confirmation did not explode. It settled. Quiet. Final. The associate kept staring at the screen as if the numbers might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. 3 days ago, he repeated, slower this time. The investor with the phone leaned closer, his voice dropping. So the projections existed before the investor packet was sent out. Claire did not speak. She let the table connect the sequence on their own. That mattered more than any explanation. Ethan remained still, but the control he held now was different. It was no longer about leading. It was about containing damage. That does not prove intent, he said. The sentence was measured. Careful. The woman in the navy suit looked at him directly. It proves timing, she replied. And timing is intent when it affects disclosure. Claire reached for the contract again, this time turning one page back. A small motion. Almost invisible. But it revealed something new. A printed footer at the bottom of the page. She tapped it lightly. Look at the document version number, she said. The associate leaned in. Version 5.2, he read. Claire nodded. Now check the digital file you received yesterday. The investor with the phone moved quickly, scrolling through his copy. Version 5.1, he said. The room tightened again. A concrete difference. Not interpretation. Not theory. Evidence. Claire spoke calmly. That means this document was updated after distribution, she said. But the update was not shared. Ethan's eyes flicked to the footer, then back to Claire. Internal revisions happen, he said. Claire held his gaze. Not when external parties are expected to sign based on a previous version, she replied. The associate closed his laptop halfway, then opened it again. His movements were no longer confident. If version 5.2 includes both the projections and the amendment, he said, then they were prepared together. The investor with the phone nodded slowly. And withheld together. The woman in the navy suit leaned back, her expression no longer neutral. That is not a discrepancy, she said. That is a coordinated change. Ethan exhaled once. Not frustration. Calculation. Or it is a draft that was not finalized for distribution, he said. Claire did not respond to the words. She responded to the pattern. She stepped closer to the associate's laptop and pointed to the timestamp again. Open the edit history, she said. The associate hesitated, then clicked through the file properties. A list appeared. Edits. Access points. User IDs. Claire's eye scanned quickly, then stopped. There, she said. The associate leaned in. What am I looking at? Claire pointed to a specific entry. That edit was made 2 hours before the meeting, she said. But the file was created 3 days ago. The investor with the phone frowned. So someone reopened it, he said. Claire nodded. Yes. The woman in the navy suit crossed her arms. Who? The associate scrolled down, then froze. It says, executive access, he said. Ethan's gaze sharpened. That is not specific enough, he said. Claire did not move her finger. Scroll one line down, she said. The associate did. His breath caught slightly. There is a secondary access log, he said. Manual override. The room stilled again. This time, no one spoke immediately. Because everyone understood what that meant. Manual override was not routine. It required clearance. It required intent. Claire finally stepped back, giving the table space to absorb it. The file was prepared days in advance, she said. Then accessed and modified right before this meeting. Ethan did not deny it. He did not confirm it. He simply looked at the screen, then at Claire. The balance had shifted again. Not fully. Not yet. But enough. The woman in the navy suit spoke slowly. So whoever did this had both foresight and access, she said. Claire nodded. Yes. The investor with the phone added, and control over when information was revealed. Claire's eyes returned to Ethan. Exactly. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was directional. It was leading somewhere. And Ethan understood that the next step would not be about documents or timestamps anymore. It would be about the person behind them. Because Claire was no longer just exposing inconsistencies. She was narrowing the field. And there was only one question left that could end this completely. The room did not wait anymore. The question had formed, and now it demanded an answer. Ethan looked at the screen one last time, then at the associate. Expand the manual override log, he said. His voice was calm again, but this time it carried something else. Acceptance of the next step. The associate hesitated for only a second before clicking deeper into the system. A secondary panel opened. Smaller. More technical. It listed user credentials tied to override actions. His eye scanned the entries, then stopped. His hand froze on the trackpad. It is tagged, he said quietly. The investor with the phone leaned forward. Tagged? To what? The associate swallowed. An executive credential, he said. Not general access. Named access. Claire did not move. She watched the moment unfold exactly as she expected. Read it, the woman in the navy suit said. The associate hesitated again, then spoke. Override executed under E.Cole. Administration. The words landed clean. No confusion. No ambiguity. The room shifted instantly. Not gradually. Completely. Every line of suspicion, every piece of timing, every detail Claire had pointed to aligned into one undeniable structure. The override was not anonymous. It was tied directly to Ethan Cole. The investor with the phone lowered it slowly. That is your credential, he said. Ethan did not deny it. He did not interrupt. He looked at the screen, then at the contract, then finally at Claire. Yes, he said. The admission was quiet. Controlled. But it was enough. The woman in the navy suit leaned forward, her tone no longer measured. So you accessed the file 2 hours before this meeting, she said. You had the projections ready 3 days ago. And you introduced an undisclosed amendment into a document already circulated. Ethan exhaled slowly. I accessed the file, he said. That is correct. The associate stared at him. Sir, did you authorize the amendment? He asked. The question hung heavier than anything before it. Because now it was no longer about inference. It was about decision. Claire finally moved. She stepped forward, not toward the contract, but toward the laptop. She pointed to one more line beneath the override entry. Scroll down, she said. The associate did. Another field appeared. A linked device ID. What is that? The investor asked. The associate read it aloud. External tablet. Registered to, he stopped. His eyes widened slightly. Claire did not look at the screen. She looked at Ethan. Your assistant brought a tablet into the room earlier, she said. She placed the folder on the table. The woman in the navy suit connected it immediately. So the file was accessed remotely, she said. From inside this room. The associate nodded slowly. Yes, he said. The override was executed from a device that was physically here. Ethan's gaze did not leave Claire. The control he had rebuilt was gone now. Not shattered. Removed. Piece by piece. You prepared the data in advance, Claire said. You waited until the contract was printed and distributed. Then you inserted the amendment at the last possible moment, supported by projections no one had seen. The investor with the phone leaned back. "That is not aggressive negotiation," he said. "That is manipulation." Ethan did not respond. Not yet. Because there was nothing left to challenge. The evidence was layered. Verified. Timed. Logged. Claire stepped back slightly, her role shifting again. She was no longer uncovering. She had finished that. Now she was holding the final piece. "There is only one thing missing," she said. The room turned toward her. The woman in the navy suit spoke quietly. "What?" Claire's voice remained calm. "Intent is proven by pattern," she said. "But it is confirmed by repetition." She let that settle, then added, "And this is not the first time this exact structure has been used." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Not in denial. In recognition. Claire met his gaze fully now. 3 years ago, she said, that same clause cost someone everything. The silence that followed was not about this deal anymore. It reached backward. Into something older. Something buried. And for the first time, the room understood that this was not just about what Ethan had done tonight, but about what he had done before, and who had been waiting all along for the moment to bring it back into the light. The room held its breath, but for the first time, the tension was no longer aimed at Claire. It had turned. It settled fully on Ethan Cole. He stood still for a moment, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, fingers no longer tapping, no longer controlling anything. The evidence was complete. The pattern was undeniable. And yet, something in his expression shifted, not defensive, not strategic, but something quieter, something that did not belong to the man who had dominated the room just minutes ago. Claire watched him carefully. She did not speak. She did not need to. The silence now belonged to him. Ethan's gaze dropped to the contract, then to the handwritten clause, then finally to his own reflection faintly visible in the polished surface of the table. For a brief second, the room around him seemed to fade, and something older, something heavier, surfaced in its place. A memory. A kitchen table under dim light. Papers spread across it. A man sitting across from him, older, worn, holding a contract with trembling hands. "You said this was fair," the man had said, his voice strained but controlled. Ethan had not looked up then either. "It is within the terms," he had replied. Cold. Precise. Final. The man had nodded slowly, as if trying to understand something that was never meant to be understood. "Within the terms," he repeated. His hand had tightened on the paper. "And outside of what is right." Ethan remembered the silence that followed. He remembered choosing not to answer. He remembered standing up, adjusting his jacket, and walking away while the man remained seated, staring at the document that would unravel everything he had built. The memory did not shout. It did not accuse. It simply existed. And for the first time in years, Ethan did not push it away. Back in the present, his hand shifted slightly on the table. The movement was small, but it carried weight. He exhaled slowly, then looked up at Claire. There was no calculation left in his eyes now. Only clarity. "What was his name?" he asked quietly. The question caught the room off guard. Claire did not answer immediately. She studied him for a moment, as if measuring whether the question deserved the truth. Then she spoke. "Daniel Bennett," she said. The name landed differently. Not as evidence. As connection. Ethan's expression changed, just enough for those watching closely to see it. "Bennett," he repeated. His voice softened, almost imperceptibly. Claire held his gaze. "My father," she said. The room fell into a deeper silence than before. Not tense. Not sharp. Something else. Something human. Ethan's hand lifted from the table, then returned, as if unsure where to rest. He reached for his phone, then stopped halfway. His fingers hovered above it. For the first time that night, they trembled. Slightly. Real. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. "I remember that case," he said. The words were slower now. He was not performing. He was remembering. "I told myself it was business." Claire did not interrupt. Ethan looked down at the phone again. His thumb brushed the screen, then pulled back. The hesitation was visible. Vulnerable. The kind of hesitation no one in that room had ever seen from him. "I was wrong," he said. The sentence was quiet, but it carried more weight than anything he had said all evening. He unlocked the phone. His hand was not steady. He scrolled through his contacts, then stopped. The name on the screen reflected in his eyes. He hesitated again. Then he pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. The room did not move. Ethan swallowed, his voice unsteady when he finally spoke. "Claire," he said softly, not looking away from the call screen, "I do not know if this will fix anything." His grip tightened slightly. "But I am done pretending it does not matter." The line connected. A voice answered on the other end. And Ethan Cole, for the first time in that room, did not sound like a man in control as he began to speak. The call did not end the moment. It opened it. Ethan stood there, phone still in his hand, his voice quieter now, stripped of the authority that had filled the room earlier. "I am sorry," he said into the line. The words were simple. Direct. Real. He listened. For a long second, no one in the room moved. Then his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough to show something had shifted on the other end. "You are here?" he asked softly. Claire's breath caught, just slightly. The front door of the restaurant opened before anyone could process the question. Cold evening air slipped into the room. A man stepped inside. Mid-60s. Shoulders slightly bent from years that had not been kind. His coat was worn but clean. His eyes searched the room with quiet urgency until they found Claire. "Claire," he said. Her name broke something in the air. She did not walk. She moved before she realized it. Her tray slipped from her hand and landed softly against the carpet. She crossed the distance between them in seconds. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling for the first time all night. Daniel Bennett reached her just as fast. His hands lifted, unsure for a split second, then wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her into him. The embrace was not careful. It was tight. Real. Years of distance collapsing into a single moment. Claire held on to him, her fingers gripping the back of his coat as if letting go would undo everything. "I am here," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I am right here." She closed her eyes. The control she had held all evening finally gave way. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another. She did not hide it. She did not step back. Across the room, Ethan stood still, watching. Not as a CEO. Not as the man who had controlled every variable. Just as someone who had finally seen the cost of one decision carried forward through years. Daniel slowly pulled back, just enough to look at her face. His hand came up, brushing a strand of hair away from her cheek. His fingers trembled slightly. "You did not have to do this alone," he said. Claire shook her head gently, her voice soft but steady. "I know," she replied. "I just needed you to be here now." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I am not going anywhere," he said. Behind them, the woman in the navy suit lowered her gaze respectfully. The associate closed his laptop without a sound. The investor with the phone placed it face down on the table. The room understood what this moment belonged to. Ethan took a step forward, then stopped. He did not interrupt. He did not claim space that was not his. For the first time, he allowed silence to exist without trying to shape it. Daniel turned slightly, his eyes meeting Ethan's across the room. There was no anger in them now. Only something deeper. Something that had already survived the damage. Ethan spoke quietly. "I should have listened back then," he said. Daniel held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. You are listening now, he replied. The word settled between them. Not a resolution. Not a full repair. But a beginning that had been denied for too long. Claire reached for her father's hand, her fingers wrapping around his. Warm. Steady. Real. She looked at Ethan, then back at her father. Her voice was calm again, but softer now, grounded in something that did not need to prove itself anymore. Some things take time, she said. But they do not have to stay broken. And in that quiet space, surrounded by people who had just witnessed power shift in a way no contract ever could, the room finally understood that dignity was not something you take, it was something you return.